Thank you so much. Oh, and look who we have here. Uh, hey, friends. My name is Matios. I use he, him pronouns with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. Uh, and I see Kim just joined the call here. But this is our first Tuesday webinar on the policing of gender and sexuality. And we've got a packed agenda here. And one of the gender and sexuality work group co-leads just chimed in. So Kim, I'm happy to give it to you to talk about, or I can kick us off if you're still getting settled in.
I'm still driving, but we could do a check-in maybe. Does that sound good with people? Yeah. Okay.
That sounds
okay. Do you want to lead that, Matthew?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you so much.
Feedback. Yeah. Again, my name is Matios. This is our first Tuesday webinar on the fight against the policing of gender and sexuality. We've got a packed agenda, which I will share on the screen, but I think we're going to kick it off with a check-in, and maybe we can say our names, our pronouns, and then this is one we use. Well, we can kind of a check-in we have in the War on Youth that we've used in the War on Youth workshop before is what's your first memory of surveillance, but maybe to kind of tailor it to this specific. If folks are comfortable, you can unmute and talk about this, or you can just drop it in the chat. What's your first memory of your gender being? And I can go first. And I personally remember, being a young boy, I had a higher pitched voice, and so that was something that would I would often be told to correct. So that's something people monitored and surveilled, and a manifestation of policing gender and sexuality. So if you feel inclined, go ahead and just unmute and chime in with maybe your names, pronouns, and that specific icebreaker, or you can just type it in the chat. If you're not comfortable doing either, that's cool too.
I can go ahead. I definitely thought of something immediately. So my name is Ashley Madness. I use she, her pronouns, and I do a lot of work with Swap LA. Also, we'll get to that later. And my, I'm a trans woman, and I remember very, specifically in kindergarten, because we went to a preschool, and then I went to a different school for kindergarten. And me and my best friend had been best friends in preschool and always hung out together. But now that we're in kindergarten, once we break up to play in our first or second day of class, suddenly we're separated into boys and girls. And I go into one place, they go into another place, and we're both in the right places. This whole division of places is wrong for us. And we were 5 or 6. The early stuff gets you.
Thank you so much for that, Ashley. And folks, feel free to jump in if you feel inclined to do so. We're not going to popcorn or anything like that. If you feel moved, or type it in the chat. And I'll repeat the question. It's we're just saying our names, our pronouns, and our earliest memory that we can think of right now when our gender was surveilled or policed.
I could go next. Hi, everyone. My name's Kim. I use she, they pronouns. And I've always kind of felt, I don't know, I always felt some type of way about my gender. So I remember one time I was forced to wear dresses when I was little, and I hated dresses. So I was forced to wear a dress for kindergarten, and I get to school and this little boy's like, "Why are you wearing a dress? It's not a special occasion." And I was like, "This is why I don't wear dresses." And I had a whole crisis. And then the next day I wore jeans, and of course, "Why are you wearing jeans? You're not a boy." So yeah, I remember being all stressed out because I didn't want to I wanted to wear what I wanted to wear. And to me, it was important to be comfortable while playing. And I wish that was prioritized instead of presenting whatever people think is your correct gender. And yeah, that's my story. Anyone can feel free to chime in or put it in the chat.
Thanks so much, Kim.
Yeah, hi folks, this is Tiff. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Oh,
we can hear you.
Sorry, I have such bad Wi-Fi. I always kind of assume that I'm not connecting. Hi, sorry to join a little late. Yeah, Tiff, they, them pronouns. I'm sorry I missed that really great introduction question. The earliest memory of how gender was surveilled or policed. Yeah, that brings up a lot, but I'm just thinking about like, yeah, with little, with little kids, there was just like, I was a swimmer as a little kid. And I don't, yeah, just like, yeah, just there was always a lot of conversation amongst ourselves as kids about like, who's developing and who's not and what that looks like, and just like different types of feelings associated with that. And just being very extremely aware that that was always being surveilled by just about anybody, and anybody could kind of comment on it. So yeah, just kind of remembering that that was kind of always on display and seemed to be like open to conversation for any, adult, parent, or anyone else to kind of to speak on or make a remark about your body. That's it. Thanks.
Hi, I can go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Bria Massey, she, her pronouns. Earliest memory of how my gender was surveilled or policed. I've been thinking about this. I'm thinking maybe when I was like in school, just being like a Black girl, being told like what I could and couldn't wear really bothered me, especially like being on the thicker side. And so like there was just certain clothing items that I couldn't wear that other people could. And like being called out for just different things. That's just kind of, if that counts, that's one of the memories I've had.
Thank you, Bria, for sharing that.
I can just go next. Hey, everybody. Good evening. My name is Hamid. I go by he, him, Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. And I think some of the earliest memories which remained constant was about men don't show emotions. So, just check your emotion. And even as a little kid, you fall down and, you hurt, you want to crying and like, no, shush, boys don't cry. So just like, so those, and that became almost like a constant reminder as well. But thank you for asking.
Thank you for sharing that, Hamid. Got time. A couple more folks want to chime in, but no pressure if you don't. Again, folks can also type it in.
I'll go. My name is Lily, she, her pronouns. I'm trying to remember my first memory of this. There was a lot of shoving me in small dresses as a kid. And much like it already been mentioned, I'm like, no, I just want to wear, including dresses, whatever I want to wear that day. But the thing I remember being policed about the most, I think, is weirdly like the kinds of play I did as a kid. Like I wanted to, I don't know, pretend I was in space or something, or be a hero, and was always told like, no, that's not what little girls pretend to be. And it was just such a weird thing where I'm like, what? Like I'm obviously never gonna become an astronaut. Like why does it matter what I pretend to be as a little kid?
Thank you for sharing that, Lily. Appreciate that. Oh, yeah. Maria shared in the chat. Maria's pronouns are she, her. I remember being told when I was really little that I should hide my intelligence in order to appear more feminine. Thank you for sharing that, Maria. And we can do one more. If anybody else feels inclined, just give it another 30 seconds if folks want to check in. These are all, thank you so much, folks, for being so vulnerable and sharing these memories. I know, it can be hard to even just discuss being surveilled at all when you're younger, being policed in any which way. So yeah, I appreciate folks coming into this space and creating an environment where we can share all that. Okay, cool. And folks can always just type it in the chat if you want to add anything else, but yeah, we can just jump in. I think Kim's gonna take the reins in a little bit, but in the meantime, I think we wanted to talk about some of the work the Gender and Sexuality Work Group has been doing, and we've got Ashley Madness on the call, who's going to talk to us about a couple bills, yeah, so we can just dive on in. But yeah, here on the screen, folks should be seeing a calendar of our upcoming meetings. So our first Tuesday, that's tonight, is on the fight against the policing of gender and sexuality. Next Tuesday, we have our fight against the war on youth. The third Tuesday is our general meeting. And the fourth Tuesday is run by our data-driven policing work group. And yeah, so if there's a 50,
Sorry, Montiel. I didn't mean to cut you off. You finish up. Okay. I was wondering if someone from the coalition can share screen for our PowerPoint, but I did want to start us off with our statement of principles. Usually every meeting we start with one of our principles, and this meeting we wanted to start with: an injury to one is an injury to all. We shall not tolerate any abuse, oppression, repression, or violations made against any member of our community. We must fight together with marginalized communities to abolish all systems of oppression. You come for one, you come for all. So here at Stop LAPD Spying, we like to begin with our statement of principles just to ground us and really have us acknowledge the way that our battles are intertwined, and how colonialism, legacies of enslavement continue to police gender presentation, sexuality. And today, right, we're focusing on how the legacies of colonization and slavery have influenced the way that not only the state polices sex work, but also within our communities, right? And how we in turn also police ourselves, and what types of work, right, we see valid or not, depending on whatever we internalize or however we have done the work to uninternalize that, right? Okay, so we have a beautiful presentation that Nee worked on. So I'm not sure if we could share screen.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Slideshow.
Do you have the link to the presentation by any chance? If not, I could copy and paste it on the chat.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I'll drop it. I'm sorry, I'm sharing screen right now. Do you want me to drop the link in the chat too?
Oh no, sorry. My phone isn't showing that this That's just probably me. Yeah, so if we could go to the next slide. There we go. Okay, so me and Taylor, who is our legal intern, have been working on doing a public request for the following listed files that, well, we requested, right, a bunch of things. And we're mainly trying to figure out what happened before the Super Bowl. So what, how are police basically strategizing to go about doing these raids that happened and mostly affected sex workers, consensual sex workers, right? So a lot of the rhetoric that LAPD uses to gain support from the city is is couching the term? Collapsing sex work and sex trafficking, right? But what we noticed in the files that we received, there were no arrests for sex trafficking. All of them just said the label of prostitution. So that's just something to keep in mind. Here in the gender and sexuality webinars, we've done a lot of presentations on the differences between sex work and sex trafficking and how sex trafficking is weaponized, again, right, to police sex workers of color. And SWAP LA, along with other folks, have done a lot of work to lobby for SB 357, which we'll talk about in a bit. But okay, so back to our PRA. We received a couple files and they all pretty much were not useless, but very limiting. So we got some emails of their correspondence, but it wasn't the information wasn't really useful or helpful. It was just kind of a newsletter that they have for themselves. I know Nee was going through the files and taking note of officers that were, or who the officers involved were in the operations. And interestingly enough, there is an ex-cop that created the sex trafficking diversion program. I'm not sure if that's common knowledge or not, but me and Nee thought that was very, very interesting. So according to the arrest records obtained by LAPD, there were 1,396 arrests from December 3rd to May 25th, 2022. So we requested, I think it was 3 months before the Super Bowl, to see all the tactics that were being used before, in preparation for the Super Bowl, during the Super Bowl, right? And of course, we're kind of trying to use this as a preview for what's to come with the Olympics. And 606 of those charges were located in the Figueroa corridor. I want to say it's not prostitution specifically. Oh, go ahead, Matias.
Oh, I was just going to ask if you want me to go to the next slide, but please go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, I think it's not prostitution alone. I looked at some of the records or the Excel sheet of all the arrests, and it was mostly either soliciting prostitution itself and this one charge that I can't remember, but it was mostly those two.
Did you see loitering with intent to commit prostitution, 653.22?
Yes, definitely the loitering with intent. So that was part of the arrests and charges that were made. And for those interested in continuing to look and comb through the data, we could definitely share the documents and stuff. So yeah. Can we go to the next slide, please, Martinez? So while LAPD has handed over 4 documents, there are hundreds of missing information that we requested. Here is our follow-up to their discovery. So again, me and Taylor did the amazing work of following up, and basically they created a checklist to see what is useful for us. And out of all the things that we requested, right, I think we didn't even receive half of what we requested. So this is the email. We write with concern about the LAPD public records section's failure to meaningfully respond to our request for documents that was submitted on April 28th, 2022. The LAPD is responsible for conducting an extensive search in good faith. And if the department determines that the certain documents do not exist, then the department has to categorically state that. However, no such determination was made, and something about, I think that was a note for them, something about how it's impossible that the only records they have related to diversion are from a police newsletter that doesn't even mention their diversion programs. The following is a breakdown of the request that specifies the documents LAPD has submitted. So those are the 4 documents that we received, which is the fire department's Operation West Bureau newsletter, arrest data from December 3rd to May 25th, just 1 email thread from Operation West Bureau sharing their January through March 2022 newsletter internally and to city council members. And DSBD correspondence contains immigration enforcement and department operations from 2021. And the rest is the list of the documents that we haven't received yet. So would someone like to read it out loud, or can we just read it ourselves while I park my car?
I can help read some of those while you're parking.
Thank you.
Was that this is the list of not yet received? Is that right, Kim? I think that's what we're saying.
Yes, Tiff, thank you.
So not yet received. All records, reports, or memos referencing prostitution, solicitation of prostitution, and or trafficking from December 1st, 2021 to present. Any manuals, memos, guides, training documents, reports regarding diversion for prostitution related charges from the same date, December 1st, 2021 to present. All records, reports, or memos regarding vice unit staffing, vice unit roster, and or the vice unit staffing model that references prostitution, trafficking, diversion for prostitution related charges and or solicitation of prostitution. I'll read one more and see if anyone else wants to also read some. All records, reports, email, or memos regarding human trafficking task force, the roster for the human trafficking task force, the staffing model and or human trafficking. Oh yeah, the staffing and the staffing model. Does anyone want to pick up number 5?
I can jump in. All email communications between LAPD and city council offices that reference quote unquote vice unit, quote unquote prostitution, trafficking, and or vice operations from December 2021 to present day. Information for individuals referred by LAPD to the district attorney for prosecution for charges under Penal Code 647 and 653 from December 1st, 2021 to present day. And would anybody else like to read the last 2?
I'd be happy to. Item 7 was partially received, but arrest records did not contain the race or demographics for those arrested under Penal Code 647 and 653. Item 8 was partially received, but omitted demographic information about who was arrested and recommended for diversion.
And yeah, I'm not sure. Kim, are you back? Or if not?
Yes, I haven't parked, but I'm I stopped. Thank you everyone for reading those. Yeah, so the list of things that we received is twice as long as the thing. I mean, the list of things that we received is only half of what we actually asked for. And there's very little information of other communications that we asked about. So we sent in this follow-up or we're going to send this follow-up, I think, on August 2nd, which is Tuesday. And yeah, shout out to me again and Taylor for working on this. So if we could go to the next slide. We also wanted to share some of the strategies that we have already seen within our previous PRA requests, and how we see surveillance very much being done on sex workers. So the history of mission creep, the police history of mission creep, LAPD was gifted 2 Dragonflyer X6 drones in 2015 from the city of Seattle. They call it a gift, oftentimes through grants, knowing that this technology will become a line item in their budget for the following year. While drones themselves might not have facial recognition, they are linked to FBI's next generation identification database, the largest collection of biometric data in the world. And here's a quote from LAPD. This would actually be a terrible device for spying. You could see it pretty clearly. So that's just one example of the technology that's already existing in policing, folks. I'm sorry, I feel like we haven't paused for discussion. So we wanted to share the sheet of arrests, but it also contains personal information that we didn't want to share. So if there was a way to hide that, that would probably be useful for us to actually look at the way that these arrests are done. But yeah, we can pause. Do folks have any questions, concerns about what we've been talking about so far? We could also go to the next slide.
I actually have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, this is Tiff. Yeah, I'm interested to hear from folks, like as far as thinking about the LAPD's human trafficking task force and how they it's been for the last, we're talking about the surveillance of folks at the Super Bowl and how that was happening in January and February, kind of the build up to the Super Bowl. My question for folks here is linking that to the fact that in January for the last few years, and probably going back beyond that as well, LAPD always brings up the fight against human trafficking, and they
I don't know if it's the case for everybody else, but I can't.
They can kind of speak on that, the fact that how much this does actually happen every January, which I think was declared National Human Trafficking Task Force Awareness Month 10 years ago or something like that. So I'm just I know that we're thinking about the surveillance of sex workers in linking it to the Super Bowl and other major sporting events, which we know will keep happening, but also just thinking about is this something that happens every January for folks as well?
I just linked in the chat the sheriff's department talking about their annual early February anti-human trafficking bust. So the Super Bowl is absolutely an excuse to have more of these resources. But yeah, the anti-trafficking hysteria people made January Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and the cops definitely know about that already. I'm not sure if LAPD always has an annual thing the same way, but yeah, totally valid, Tiff.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. That makes sense. Yeah, it's just the last few years I've definitely noticed it, and I'm sure I'm sure it's been beyond that too. Thank you.
And I asked that question about those numbers, whether that was just prostitution, because I looked at some of the numbers for other LAPD sex work arrests, and those numbers looked extremely high. So if it was just prostitution, that meant they went freaking wild over the Super Bowl, particularly since those charges are all sex work charges. They still might have gone pretty hard in terms of arresting people a lot for the Super Bowl specifically, because those did look like very big numbers for the time period covered.
We
But
have the
yeah.
Excel sheet open. If you'd like, I can pop it up. So I know there's some confusion. So it was a mix of numbers, Ashley. So Matthias, if you'd like, I can do screen share and then pull it up.
I would love to be involved in that at some point, but I think yeah, I wouldn't be able to figure out anything just looking at the Excel sheet right now, anything clever. But
Right. So because we're in the process of putting all this stuff together as well. So this is the Excel sheet. So if you can see that it's prostitution, loitering, and then soliciting, but a lot of that is mostly prostitution. So in between there's loitering, solicitation, and then I don't know what supervisor or prostitute would be. Maybe it was somebody who is making the deals, and then engage, solicit sex for money, prostitution, adult school, visiting pupil. So as we can see, it's a mixed bag of people. And it just goes through. Loitering is definitely another big piece, and then engage / solicit sex for money. That's just, and once we have all of this together, then it'll be available for folks as well. And these are where the areas, and yeah. Just wanted to hold off on some of the names and all of that for now. Does that actually give you an idea?
yeah, definitely. And to me, it looks like a spike, although I don't know if we have tons of data to say how often they arrest. I'm linking here in the chat this one study that we used a lot in 357 advocacy, that has where they did a similar thing with a PRA to the city attorney and to LAPD, and that was from 2017 to 2019. And for that 2-year period, I think there was about a total of 4,000 arrests of women for prostitution. So just looking at that versus this, it looks like they really went aggressive for the Super Bowl, or starting with COVID or something, maybe after the uprising.
Right. And this is a 6-month record. So yeah, you're right. Even if because it starts from December 3rd through May 31st.
Okay, so we'll have to look at it and the other one more closely to see. Yeah.
So I can close it off then.
Awesome job getting that data, by the way, and hopefully you'll force them to fork some more over.
And just a real quick note to make sure. So this is this actual drone, this type of drones were destroyed. These were as a result of the LAPD originally got these drones in 2014, is when we launched the drone-free LAPD No Drones LA fight, which resulted then these drones not even taken off. They remained grounded. They were under a lock and key. And then in 2017, they destroyed these drones. So later in 2017, then when the drone program was approved, now they have different types of drones, which including drones with night visions and things like that, that can also go into people's homes through windows and things like that as well.
Okay, should we go to the next slide? So automated license plate readers, ALPRs, can capture 1,800 plates per minute. Unlike their name suggests, ALPRs don't just pick up license plate numbers. In addition to recording where and when a license plate was caught on an ALPR, they also capture images surrounding locations and people. Motorola's own website advertises ALPR's expansive capabilities. And these are sold by Motorola and Axon. Hamid, did you want to elaborate on ALPRs?
Yeah, ALPRs are, but they have been a part and parcel of the architectural surveillance, and one of the things, especially I think for policing of sex work, was this really messed up idea that was proposed, but it was shut down by Nuri Martinez in the Figueroa corridor, to start using ALPRs, which then would result in gathering information on people who are driving through, and then to send people Dear John letters, which is the most absurd thing that was proposed. But like I said, this was going on in 2000. I don't know if you remember that incident. It was in 2017 or something like that, which, people are going around minding their business, or even if they are, like, regardless of what, but this is the extent of where they would go to harass and threaten people and go after them. But the LPRs are a very huge tool of surveillance that these folks use.
I remember Tiff was also coming through some of the meeting notes, and I think they mentioned that a couple of regular folks that live around the Figueroa corridor were also writing down license plate numbers and policing folks in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. They'd take pictures of license plates, write down plate numbers, and then give them to local police, which I imagine still happens today, with folks in certain communities, and probably using different apps as well.
Yeah, like Next Door and all of those, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, part of our brainstorming was to kind of create a zine where we could more so speak to intra-community policing and how, as communities of color, we shouldn't ourselves criminalize each other. So in efforts to avoid basically snitching, or curb snitching, we wanted to make a zine that kind of explains why what they're doing, right, isn't, I don't have the word, isn't cool, I guess. But we could move on to talk about also Cellbrite, which is another technology being used to police sex workers. If we go to the next slide, me did this wonderful illustration, I think. So Cellbrite is an Israel-based firm. It sells tools that can pull data from most mobile phones on the market, such as contact lists, emails, and erased messages. And I also believe that Tiff, they were using this, right, they mentioned Cellbrite, I think, in their meetings, I want to say. I remember reading something about it.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, this was mentioned by one of the cops who leads one of the human trafficking task force, one of their teams, and saying, so we know it's specifically used in those efforts. And yeah, they definitely take people's phones, pull the information. It pulls their all their social media information and contacts, just a ton of stuff on their phone, and then just keeps that information. And then like all of these devices, it then uses it to make try to make connections to people and to figure out connections to people, and just kind of map people's social networks and relationships. And so that's some of what it does. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be interesting to kind of do a comparison between how, because in terms of policing sex work online, there's also FOSTA, FESTA. So it would be interesting to see how Cellbrite and FOSTA SESTA, like where they collide or how they both surveil. But yeah, so these are just some of the policing tactics that we have information on, right? There's so many things that I'm sure are going on the ground. And we wanted to also give Ashley Madness from SWAP LA the floor to talk about the way that AB5 and SC 357 are affecting sex workers on the ground. So I think it's okay to stop sharing now, and I will introduce Ashley. So Ashley Madness uses she, her pronouns, is a transgender sex worker based in Los Angeles. Since 2018, she has worked in Sex Workers Outreach Project Los Angeles, SWAP LA, where she currently serves as a board member. Ashley has also served as a member of the steering committee of DCRIM Sex Work California since 2020. With SWAP LA, Ashley coordinated the Emergency Relief Fund launch in early 2020 to provide cash aid during the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Ashley has also helped SWAP LA transition leadership and fundraising models, and with coordinating and implementing SWAP LA's advocacy strategies, including through her work at DCRIM Sex Work California in support of SB 357. Thank you so much, Ashley, for making the time to come talk to us about all the work that SWAP LA is doing, all the work that you have done, and other folks have done on the ground.
Yeah, of course. So hi, everyone. If you don't know me yet, I'm Ashley Madness. Nice to meet you, and nice to see some of you again. Yeah, so I'm an organizer with SWAP LA, and sort of through SWAP LA, and now also independently with this new coalition, DCRIM Sex Work California. I'll start with the coalition just to get the kind of basics out of the way. This is kind of a coalition that has its roots in some like 2018, 2019 organizing that resulted in SB 233, which decriminalized condom possession. You couldn't use condoms as evidence that somebody was committing sex work offense after that. And so that the folks working on that bill were a lot of like sex work organizations that supported sex workers, and the sorts of orgs that are sex worker friendly. And so from those sort of relationships, some of those organizers pulled together a town hall shortly after COVID started, and tried to intentionally center trans sex workers of color, and street-based sex workers. And so that was a phenomenal town hall. We got this little letter of recommendations to the governor that they ignored, of course, and then came together to form up a coalition in the end of 2020. And so our first bill was SB 357, which just passed a month ago. And what that law does is it makes it so that it's no longer a crime to loiter with the intent to commit prostitution. So as you just saw from the spreadsheet, hella people were being arrested for this and are still being arrested for this until the law goes into effect next January. The bill that we passed doesn't just take the crime off the books, it also gives people who are facing charges from when it was still a law, like people who get arrested in these upcoming months, and people who have it on their records already, it gives them a way to have their charges dismissed or sealed that's expedited and doesn't involve any special fees or anything, but they will have to go to the courthouse where they faced the charges originally to file that. And the forms aren't out yet, but they will be soon, and then we will be promoting it so people can get their records cleared. Because the charge, loitering with intent to commit prostitution, we know it's bullshit, but that doesn't mean that employers know it's BS. That doesn't mean that housing, people who might offer housing know it's BS. That doesn't mean the government knows it's BS. And particularly, technically, it's considered a crime involving moral turpitude for like immigration purposes. So this could be a reason to be deported just for standing there. So we're very excited that it is no longer law, and it took a lot of work of us at SWAP LA and other sex worker organizers. Decrim Sex Work California is led by a steering committee that's majority trans and majority POC, and like 100% sex workers and current and former sex workers. So it's kind of monumental that we've gotten sex workers in California to a place where we're passing legislation in a way where we are centering queer and trans sex workers, and we're making sure to include street-based sex workers as well. Although the steering committee is not majority street-based sex workers, maybe one day soon. Yes, so the bill is the immediate impact on the ground once it goes into effect on January 1st. So unfortunately, it's not instant. Is going to be that cops will no longer be able to arrest somebody just for standing around looking like a prostitute. Now, you saw on the spreadsheet, there's another charge, solicitation. And you saw a lot of charges for prostitution. So those are still technically crimes. And what solicitation is that's the crime of trying to advertise your prostitution services. So solicitation is harder to prove than loitering, just standing around looking like a prostitute, because there has to be some kind of communication from the person you're accusing of solicitation. So somebody has to say something, somebody has to wave or something, and those words or that gesture has to be a communication that's making a transaction happen. So with loitering, if you just look like you are vaguely sex worker-y, it's the wrong place at the wrong time. Once they arrest you and search you, you happen to have condoms, lube, and cash. There's a lot of kind of BS reasons why they can come approach you and arrest you, search you, and then by the time that's all over, they'll have something where, okay, there's evidence that you committed the crime, because the crime was defined so vaguely that, any of a laundry list of reasons could be used against somebody to prove that they're loitering for the intent to commit prostitution instead of because they want to make the next bus, and the statute specifically let police use how somebody is dressed, the time of day or the time of night, the neighborhood that they're in, and whether it's like known for sex work, whether or not there have been arrests for sex work in the neighborhood that somebody is in, which means that by pointing to historical discriminatory policing, police can justify continuing discriminatory policing. Whatever they used to arrest people for, we can always arrest people as long as they're in that neighborhood. That's, they also have cash in their purse half the time. So we can, make those arrests and search those people and get them. Anyway, so all of that was part of the law, the loitering law that we were able to repeal. So without that being a crime that can get you deported, can get on your record, could potentially result in jail time, it should be harder for cops to arrest folks who are working on the street or who are in neighborhoods that are policed like this, or who might just be vulnerable because of how they look to a cop just alleging baselessly that they're a sex worker. So in pursuing that advocacy, we relied on that study that I've shared in the chat earlier considerably, which was able to show that even though only 9% of Los Angeles's population are Black adults, Black women account for 56% of those arrested under the loitering offense, which just on the gut check of legislators convinced people like this can't be right. So that was very helpful. That study also showed that 25% of the arrests under the loitering law were overturned by a judge for insufficient evidence eventually, which kind of, if 1 out of 4 times, that's barely better than 1 out of 2 times. Like that shows that your standards are very subjective. Honestly, in the advocacy, most of the time you don't get to that point about the 25%. Once you get to the racial disparity, it kind of, at least we were able to pass it there because it's just so manifestly, has such a manifestly disproportionate impact that most people can't, they're not even listening to more arguments. They say, yeah, that's just messed up. And I think that's SB 357. Those are the big points. Unfortunately, it will not just stop. Obviously, it doesn't decriminalize prostitution. That would be great. Doesn't decriminalize sex work. That would be even better. But it should make it, especially just for people walking around, it should make it a lot safer and a lot easier. For people doing sex work, it's still a risky profession, but it's a higher barrier that the cops have to meet in order to arrest you. So it should make it, you're less likely to get arrested any given night. You have more of an opportunity to kind of scope the cops coming and, turn away from the curb, look at your cell phone towards facing the public school. And then how are they going to grab you for solicitation? You're facing the other way. So it should be helpful. Yeah, so I see a question in the chat that looks fantastic. How do folks anticipate policing and surveillance of sex workers changing as a result of it? Like, do folks anticipate different tactics? Yeah, so I was just kind of getting into that, where I suspect that, so right now, if a cop wants to get overtime and to get arrests to justify their overtime, they can go to areas where street-based sex work often happens, or where it's been historically recorded as occurring, and arrest who they see to get these loitering charges, right? It's a total bottom of the barrel filler cop, but you're doing your overtime because your kid's about to go to college or whatever. And so they want to make sure to have those hours available to their cop force. So without loitering itself being a source of callers, I suspect and I hope that patrolling street-based sex workers is now a less appealing use of cop resources. It's harder for everyone in the cop bureaucracy to justify sending people out on these patrols where they arrest street-based sex workers, because you only get a valid arrest that holds up in court if you get the evidence of solicitation or the evidence of prostitution. That's a lot more work, a lot fewer arrests per cop hour, and probably makes their numbers look worse. And so I would suspect that less time will be spent by the cops who are trying to find, human trafficking victims on the strolls, arresting street-based sex workers, where because they'll be getting fewer arrests per hour, and more of that time is going to be spent on the online websites getting online-based escorts like what I do right now. So I suspect that will happen, and it's, you hate to displace policing from one place to another, but if it's because you made it harder in one place, that looks like a good thing to me. And generally street-based sex workers face more risks than online sex workers. So even if this means the streets get less cops, but the online boards get more cops, that probably means less sex workers get arrested. That probably means, and at the end of the day, that actually probably means there's less sex workers going hungry, losing their housing, because the people getting arrested are the people who are more likely to be able to afford a hotel room or a trap place, or the online ads that can be pricey. Happy to answer any more questions about SB 357. That was a great question. Yeah, and I can also move on to AB 5. And
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I had a question about online sex work, and if through decrim sex work, are there any, I'm like, y'all just finished the campaign, so y'all must be so exhausted. Are there any future ideas for campaigns to tackle how SESTA has impacted folks, or how you say that policing is going to change to online sex work, right? How, or not change, but I guess the resources are going to move to online sex work. How I guess how can we envision being part of the strategy to also hurt that policing, right?
Yeah. In terms of the easy answer, the first part of the question, the coalition is called Decrim Sex Work California, and we would love to decriminalize sex work entirely. And we I have been talking along the lines of, if any sex worker is getting arrested for anything, that's not right. So if we pass a bill next year that decriminalizes sex work, I don't think we're going to be able to abolish the police in that same piece of legislation, although we definitely would if we could. And maybe that's the move, is to kind of go straight for some end goals in some ways. And then in terms of how maybe Stop LAPD Spying Coalition kind of fits in, I mentioned that study that we used in the advocacy, and the little bit of data that we had from that one UCLA study. Since data is so scarce in this most of the published material is propaganda, and since it's propaganda, like not even a legislator can take it that seriously. Like you just have to read the words literally instead of what they're trying to portray to say, oh, they didn't make any trafficking arrests. I wouldn't have noticed that if I didn't read closely. But they're the way that they do things, you can even it's not a very credible source. So if you have one good credible source saying this is how the data breaks down in terms of demographics, this is how the data breaks down in terms of like use of resources, I think that's a very powerful argument. And definitely as a coalition, we proposed also this year a housing budget ask that would provide housing and wraparound services for sex worker-based organizations to serve sex workers. And as an organization, having that kind of package is better to say it's better to have a sort of complete argument that incorporates, like, instead of this affirmatively harmful policing, we could be doing affirmatively beneficial services. So we're definitely kind of leaning in that direction because we are trying to build that better world where we actually have housing and healthcare, while we're trying to dismantle the police state. So like the PRA request is extremely helpful. Something that you could publish based on that would be extremely helpful, and I'd be very happy to help with some of that analysis and what have you, and be great for Swap LA and Stop LAPD Spying to team up some more on it, etc. Because I think the work that Stop LAPD Spying is so good at in terms of explaining this sort of architecture of surveillance and everything that really is essential for us to move forward in our kind of decriminalized sex work thing, because we're not interested in legalization and regulation and preserving the surveillance and police state apparatus. And we need to use the kind of anti-police arguments and tools and the stuff that you all develop in order to have that handled so that we don't have to come up with it ourselves, and we can use it as a tool to do the sex work advocacy. Yeah, and I want to say thank you for the work y'all have done, because I think also one success of Decrim Sex Work California has been the California part. If we had tried to start Decrim Sex Work USA, I don't think we would be celebrating a successful bill from Congress. And I think that here in LA, we might have a good opportunity to show again and again the public how harmful policing and surveillance is, how it's at every turn it's unjust. One thing I do worry about is that, if the public can listen to sex workers saying that the policing of sex work specifically is not okay, but if they're not learning why policing is harmful as a broader practice, then we're not accomplishing our end goal. I hope that helps.
Definitely. I feel like every meeting I'm like, okay, what can we do? Just so we're not just kind of bombarded with all this information and all these strategies that are happening to us, but we have something tangible to work on. And yes, I would love, I think that Hamid, me, and I always talk about doing like a bigger report on the Figueroa corridor specifically, based on this set of data that we've requested. So, if folks are interested in that, please either email stop-LAPD spying, or you could email myself. I'll drop my email. We're trying to do more gender and sexuality working groups, because these are webinars, so they're a little more discussion based, and I think unless working group, right? We're not bringing our work here. So let me write down our. Does anyone else have any questions for Ashley?
Yeah, Ashley, I have a bit of an unrelated question, but I'm wondering, just in discussing the architecture of surveillance, the coalition's kind of been looking at social media surveillance, and we've kind of looked at it more in like the targeting of protests or people that are critical of the LAPD. But I'm wondering if you're aware of any instances in which maybe a sex worker has been criminalized through social media surveillance, has experienced social media surveillance by the police, or has maybe caught a charge or something off social media. Yeah.
So I've generally heard of sex workers getting arrested in a sting, and then from there, cops get access to their social media, and might use that against them if applicable, just to, we have as hard evidence, it's a cop signing a statement that this was a person who, came into this hotel room after we got this text message from this number, which is associated with this ad, which has this picture. It's the whole piece of all the evidence put together is how you get the charge. So you have all this put together, and then you add on top of it, plus this was a social media message with an explicit transaction exchange to like prove a pattern of conduct or something, so it kind of comes in tangentially. Or I haven't really heard of cops using social media to arrange a sting, but it certainly could happen. But the social media censorship that sex workers, the sex workers often face a lot of social media censorship with sort of automated algorithms and content moderation systems and things like that make it so sex workers just can't use the platforms the same way, or they have to act around it, or they get booted off. Things like that is more often how like the problem with the criminalization that affects sex workers on social media. And generally the cops are pretty old school. They don't try to hack someone's Instagram and then try to get the proof, because you wouldn't have enough proof if you just got someone's social media account anyway. Although I think no, I think some sex workers have been targeted by the police in some cases for their social media usage. I've heard of that, the way any protester would. They just happen to be sex workers, or any person critical of the cops would. Sex workers, that happens to them too, the same way that you're used to, if it happens to be a sex worker who's the protester.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating. And like the specific example I'm thinking of is we have this, it's like an instructional video from 77th Division with this LAPD detective who very dehumanizingly says like, don't you hate when your suspect shows up to court like this, and then shows a picture of Chris Brown in a suit, but in reality on social media he looks like this, and it's black men with guns and whatnot. But in effect, that video kind of trains officers to submit a request to freeze an individual's story, like their Instagram story, or something that may a post, something that folks may delete. yeah, and I'm just wondering if folks have experienced that in any way, like their story or something or post has been cited. But no, thank you. That was
Yeah, and I haven't heard of that, but I wouldn't be shocked.
Actually, if you wouldn't mind, again, speaking on AB5. So AB5 was efforts. I kind of know, I know it from the gig side. I did Lyft for a while, and you know, we were fighting to be employers because working with Lyft in particular as a gig worker is fucking horrible, and most gig working platforms are horrible. But Prop 22 allowed them to get an exemption, right? So you have a bunch of gig workers without benefits and all these things. But I feel like the conversations around Prop 22 being an employee, right, has always been kind of the go-to. Like, you want to be an employee, you want to have worker protections, right? But with AB5 and particularly strippers, it's been a very different experience. So I would love to know more about how folks are being pushed out of the workplace, you know, through AB5, and how criminalization is bound to happen again because the most marginalized are being pushed out.
Absolutely. So yeah, so great intro. So there was this court decision that made it so a lot of people were employees now and had these protections, but it, you know, was a major change. And the California legislature passed AB5 to adopt it and give all those people employee protections, which a lot of people had been asking for, including at the time AB5 has passed, a lot of strippers. So the one of the big organizations or one of the organizations pushing that the AB5 on behalf of exotic dancers was Soldiers of Pole, now known as Strippers United. And Strippers United, their supporters, a good number of dancers throughout California were very excited about AB5, hoping that it would give some kind of minimum protections to people who worked in clubs in terms of, you know, not being able to, never going home without getting any money at the end of the night, which would happen under the old system, or getting, most importantly, getting the right to unionize as an employee, including the National Labor Relations Board process, getting the union card and voting, and being able to do that just like any employee at a more traditional business. So while the dancers were excited about it before it passed, once it actually did pass, some problems became apparent. Firstly, and this is the biggest problem, some of the dancers beforehand were kind of only conditionally supportive because they wanted that independent contractor flexibility regardless. You know, it was important to a lot of dancers to be able to choose which clubs to work for on which nights at their own schedule. So they can work in the town that their parents are in when it's grandma that's taking care of the kid. And so the people who wanted that flexibility were hoping that by unionizing, exotic dancers would be able to get contracts that have both options and have both options be protected by employee status, by federal and state agencies that protect employees, and by the collective bargaining rights they're hoping for. Unfortunately, in like what not to do if you are a labor union, Strippers United and Soldiers of Pole kind of moved immediately on to organizing workers that kept their jobs, even when many workers lost their jobs immediately after AB5. Because the thing about switching from independent contractors and employees to just employees is that there's a bigger cost per worker instead of just cost per shift. So before AB5, the number of dancers doesn't really matter to the club. You know, more dancers, as long as the stage is full every night, it doesn't matter if it's full of 100 people, only 20 of whom show up on a given night, or if it's 20 people who show up every night to dance. Either way, the stage is full, the club is happy. With the employee system, Now you have to account for everyone's wages differently. You have to account for everyone's hours differently. You can't provide anyone enough hours that they can get benefits, because that'll mess up your business model. And because the club owners are terrible. That's the thing to know. And you can't, yeah, and you have to guarantee minimum wage. So you have to, think twice before scheduling a dancer, etc. So what happened was, instead of having, bigger, more flexible pools of dancers that might work in a club on every given night, the clubs kind of gave the maximum without giving benefits to the smallest number of dancers. And so the more in demand body types and the more liked dancers, whatever, people who club owners liked for various reasons, much of which are prejudiced, ended up keeping their jobs and having a more steady job, but still not enough to get benefits. Additionally, in terms of the actual practices, it used to be that you, as a dancer, would pay the club like a flat rate, basically, for the house fee. You tip everybody out that helped you do your business throughout the night, and that was it. Owner management gets their house fee. Maybe you actually tip the actual manager if they're there doing their job, managing the house. You tip the DJ, you tip the bartender, you tip, people who are helping you work. But you go home and you have a price to use the club, and all the money you make is your own. You pay your own taxes on it, etc. And some people liked that model. And with the employee model, the club has to account for your hours to make sure that they pay you minimum wage on top of your tips that you take home. And that means that they have to require you, or that they do require you, to sell a certain amount of dances, or to otherwise bring a certain amount of money to the club, alcohol, something that the club gets directly. You're going to have a minimum quota now to make sure the club can cover its minimum wage it has to place. And again, they have to account for the hours differently now to make sure that that is met, to pay that minimum quota. And altogether, it seemed to generally result in dancers who kept their jobs, even losing, like having less money and having less control. So the last thing is that under the old system, in order to keep people classified as independent contractors, so they didn't have to provide extra benefits and protections, they did have to give dancers more control over their schedules, over their outfits, and kind of like wherever they could in certain ways, to try to keep this independent contractor thing going, because they always were kind of in this liminal category. Because the reality is, dancers are fundamental to the club's business. They should have more power and authority in club operations because they're so important to the business. But neither independent contractor nor employee is really a way to give, maybe dancers should be co-owners of any clubs that they dance for, if regularly. Maybe that kind of model would make more sense, if something like that. But at the very least, something with more flexibility could be very helpful for the dancers who are not able to perform those shifts as consistently, or who can only find a few gigs here and there at different clubs. Nobody's willing to hire them for those more consistent jobs. Those are the dancers that got the axe, and the organizations currently organizing the dancers that are still working have not been supporting those dancers, uplifting their calls, or incorporating their calls for more flexibility into their advocacy, or supporting those dancers even though they lost their jobs. So there's a division in the community there between dancers who felt like Soldiers of Pole and Strippers United and their supporters supported this bill, but then they didn't show up for the dancers who actually got the harmful effects of the bill, and now are only fighting for the more privileged dancers who weren't as affected. And that immediately, in my own observation, like AB5 made a lot of workers who used to be dancers working on the streets in like in a heartbeat. The next time that we went out for an outreach stroll at Swap LA, like the whole fashion of the blade changed. There's a particular way people dress when they're out working, or that people tend to dress on some of these places with, that there's a consistent fashion vocabulary, and not all of it is stereotypical sex worker or whatever. But strip clubs also have their own very particular fashion vocabulary. So when you see a bunch of girls who had a job at strip clubs literally like the week or the month before, on the street, they're still wearing the same outfits, and you can tell, oh, you know, you were just in a club. This is a club outfit. This is not what you wear when you're walking down Figueroa at 1 a.m. It's like very similar, but you know, nobody wears pleasers on Figueroa. Those are pole dancing shoes. Yeah. That's so I'm open to more questions and stuff on AB5. That's my little overview. I know I took a little bit of time with both of these, but I'm very happy to get into them as long as y'all are interested.
Thank you so much again, Ashley, for giving us a breakdown on that. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I just have a quick question, and this is more about a report in today's LA Times. And because we had this fight at City Hall, so I didn't get a chance to fully read it. And I don't know, actually, if you've seen that, this is about the lawsuit that is going on where Visa is being fined, and it goes back to Sesta Fasta and the, you know, how these card charging companies were closing out accounts for online sex work and all. So there's this lawsuit which is in play, where, you know, it's a minor you know, Pornhub, where this is a 13-year-old minor who was filmed, has then turned around and sued this agency, which then is now going after Visa as well. So that's I just wanted to ask if you've heard of that. I do get the paper. I can go run and get it and then look at the news right now. But yeah, I just wanted to ask that question and its impact on you know, potential online sex work.
No, that one is news to me, unless it's a follow-up on something I had heard a little about. But it definitely impacts sex workers, and it impacts online sex workers especially. It especially impacts sex workers who are selling digital content. Because if you're an online escort, so you meet your clients online, you find them online, those sorts of lawsuits and laws like FOSTA SESTA, they hurt your ability to advertise and they hurt your ability to screen. But if you're an online, if you sell content online, they can also hurt your ability to sell your content at all. They can hurt your ability to get your money at all. So that can be, really hard for all those types of sex workers. And how it works on the kind of platform end is, one lawsuit or one big news article or one potential liability, and companies are very quick to cut any type of practice that they had that might be opening them up to that, or to take any protective measures, even if it's harming sex workers or people of color or queer folk disproportionately or explicitly. They very rarely care about those costs compared to the benefit of theoretical protection from a theoretical lawsuit, from a theoretical victim of theoretical trafficking. And they're very quick to take measures that involve like automatic censorship or harsher moderation measures that results in lots of content being removed and lots of transactions being blocked. And often in online sex workers, since they have more of a paper trail of being online, often they get their just normal bank accounts cut off or have problems with their mortgage or their credit card because they are a sex worker. And since they have an online presence, their financial institutions might find out.
And then real quickly, a follow-up question, and this was something actually in another conversation this had come up, that if there are any this categorization of sex work or work people are engaging in, so whether the escort services versus and how that kind of plays out in this just policing of sex work and all of that. Where does that fall? And somebody, and somebody made a comment that, and I wanted to get your feedback on that, those are typically, they've been getting away with that because those are usually, just, and this is how it was stated, those are young women who are white, who are in college or maybe going to universities and all of that, and making money, so that sort of like gets a sort of a side pass versus folks who are engaging in street sex work and all of that. So just wanted to see what your thoughts were.
Well, if you look at the practices, I recently learned that Long Beach Police Department particularly pretty much only arrests cis women of color when they do online sex work stings, which to me, it's just a choice by the cops on who they want to abuse, because the demographics aren't ever that clean. Sex workers of all races and genders do sex work in every place sex work is done, which is everywhere, pretty much, so the in reality, I think the policing street-based sex workers more heavily than online sex workers is appealing to cops for a variety of reasons, but that's kind of how to think about it. It's not it's easier to get arrests if you're able to just choose a neighborhood to cruise. It's less like logistics in terms of taking the time in advance to plan what to do, to trick the escorts into seeing you, to arrange the hotel room, and to gather them all in the same place. Depending on your schedule, it might be easier to go to the stroll or the track. So in terms of demographics, I think there probably are, it probably is disproportionately like white folks online compared to working on street-based sex work being disproportionately people of color, slightly compared to Los Angeles's population. And certainly anybody who is extremely privileged and charging a ton of money and, could get a Benz if they wanted to or something, they're definitely online. They're definitely not on the street. And they might have some kind of protections in place in terms of having fancy screening mechanisms, really vetting clients, because if you have this market power to charge this high rate, you have this market power to demand that, men send you their picture of them selfie with their IDs in front of their home address, and a photo of them with their wife at their wedding day, whatever your situation is. So that could be true, but in general, it's two different places to advertise, and sex work is sex work. And that the cops making choices about who to arrest is more, messed up stuff. Like some folks down in Long Beach like to sexually harass cis women of color, so that's who they decide to arrest when they do it. And probably stuff like it's easier over time because if you're on the street, you can get those loitering charges even if you can't get anything better. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it also has to do with vulnerability, right? As Ashley was saying, like folks who charge more are able to do those screening practices versus if you are in need of, fast cash, you kind of bypass your own safety, right? Because you need to eat or you need to pay your rent. And I could definitely see being like, I'm like, just some things that I should, they're right, let me not go there. But just, right, putting your own safety on the line when it comes to surviving, and also being a lot more prone to police things, because again, right, you're not, you need cash, and not in the same way that I guess cis college white student, right, needs cash. So maybe in that way we could see the vulnerabilities change. But I've also heard that escort agencies, for example, have more, or I have met folks that work for escort agencies that talk to me about larger pay and like better screening practices. But again, you have to fit this mold of desirability because the clientele is, right, all these like richer white men. So it kind of feeds each other, I feel, in that way. Well, thank you so much, Ashley, again for this wonderful conversation. I wanted to transition us into thinking about safety practices for ourselves, whether we're sex workers or not, our online presence, right? And kind of our own, again, safety practices that we take into consideration when trying to bypass surveillance or protect ourselves from surveillance. So again, me and I want to kind of, and the Gender and Sexuality Working Group want to start writing a zine, both to inform community about why it's harmful to police sex workers, but also a tool that sex workers can use for themselves to identify these various technologies that are policing us, right, and sex workers on the ground. So again, if you're interested in working on that, if you're interested in working on our vision for the report, please email StopLAPDspying or email myself. I dropped it in the chat. And yeah, just for the last couple minutes of our webinar, again, I wanted to open the floor up to safety practices. So how are folks on the ground taking care of each other when it comes to sex work protests or any type of surveillance that you experience? Myself, for example, if I go meet someone up, I make sure that I have someone that has my location, right? I tell them like, hey, I'm gonna go here. I should be done by this time. If you don't hear back from me, please check in. So working with community, right? Or having your own community practices. What do other folks do, or what have other folks heard of when it comes to protecting yourself?
Kim, I can kind of talk about the protocols me and the homies have in place for like protests. That's cool. So yeah, so one kind of big one is if there's a direct action of any sort, like don't kind of arrive there alone, and like don't leave alone. Like no matter who you are, like have somebody you can walk with to your car, just because, you know, especially in the uprisings like 2020, we did see a lot of people getting caught up then or getting kettled then, like leaving a protest. So a lot of it is similar to what you were saying, just having folks know who you are and just having somebody witness you made it somewhere safely. And then obviously a pretty straightforward one is just never talk to police, like ever. Like, and you know, even if it seems innocuous, like just don't do it. So those are two we kind of put into place. And then I think another common one we're always talking about is just getting rid of biometrics on your phone of any sort. It's just so, you know, you can't get in there.
To wear a face mask, definitely, right? And also covering up identifiable things, like, ugh. Now I have so many tattoos and I'm like, I'm so obvious all the time. It's the downside to looking this good.
think the other couple things are just done usually if we are out on the streets and if we are in a rally or something, is to make sure, just especially our comrades who may have a record, if comrades may be on parole or probation, if what the immigration status is. So, those are just baseline kind of things that keeping an eye on that. And then also traveling as well, where sometimes during COVID that has been curtailed quite a bit. But, for example, the coalition was invited quite a bit, both in the United States and also outside as well, abroad, to speak and present at conferences or meetings and all. So we had a process in place where there would be, just a couple of people who would have exactly what you were sharing locally, Kim, about flight numbers, flight information, hotels we'll be staying at, what conference is it, and then driving wise, just going up Interstate 10, for example, through Arizona and other places too. We kind of started doing this where, and this started back in, actually back in 2010 when SB 1070 and all were being passed in Arizona. So just constantly updating whatever kind of exit you last passed, and then sending a text to you, almost like a last known position, if you will. So, just on Interstate 10 going east, just past such and such exit. So, and then just kind of keeping that 2 to 3 hours. So that was also helpful as well. Yeah, and if it's late at night, even, doesn't hurt that if you're going to stop and the area is deserted, maybe just a gas stop or, an emergency can happen. Or even if a restaurant is not a whole lot of people there or something, or, so just even kind of texting that as well, that, yo, I'm going to stop here for gas, or maybe I'm going to stop here to get a bite to eat. So yeah.
There's a trick you can do if you have layers. If you have like a little backpack underneath your outer layer, like a hoodie, sweatpants, leggings, t-shirt. If you have your backpack under your hoodie, you can turn into a whole new person in the eyes of law enforcement if you put your hoodie and your sweatpants in your backpack, and now you're a person with a t-shirt and leggings with a backpack. Because cops aren't looking closely, and a lot of the surveillance cameras and the footage, they can't get your face. They just track really what you're, they see the same outfit move from one CCTV to another CCTV. So if you're just leaving the action and you have a second to be Superman in the telephone booth, I don't know. I haven't used this trick. Last time I went out to protest, I wasn't wearing enough clothes to do this, but it's a trick.
Well, I think that's all for us. Thank you so much again for everyone. Thank you so much, Matthias, for opening us up. Haman and Tiff for chiming in. And thank you so much, Ashley, again, for your conversation. Swap LA has monthly meetings. If you follow their Instagram, you can check them out. I don't know if you wanted to plug anything, Ashley, but if anyone has any other announcements, this is the time, so the floor is open.
Swap LA just launched our annual fund, so we're trying to tell our supporters and everyone that yeah, we're sticking in it for the long haul, and we have a lot of big dreams and would love people's support. So that's our latest news, because you already heard SB 357 was passed. That was the big one. That's amazing. I've been inspired by some great work people are doing in Toronto myself. Yeah. Oh.
So you could find out more about the Swap LA Fund on their Instagram as well, or on my Instagram story if you follow me. Does anyone else have any other announcements? Again, we are the Gender and Sexuality Working Group, part of Stop LAPD Spine. Stop LAPD Spine does have meetings every Tuesday, and the next webinar is on, you could check us out on our website. We have a calendar of all our meetings. Mateo, did you wanna?
Yeah, it's the War on Youth. So plug in. I don't know what the specifics are going to be just yet, but it'll probably be the criminalization of youth. But yeah, tune in. It'll be great.
Mateo, Sakil, and me have been doing some amazing workshops with the STEM to the Future youth, and the videos are so stinking cute. Jesus Christ, like, this is who we do it for, you know? Better world. So again, thank you all for coming through. I hope this was for me a great conversation, and I hope it was for you too. If you want to plug into the GNS working group, feel free to email me or email the coalition, and we'll be doing some work on this data set that we've got, and see again how we could collab with Swap LA, and continue doing great work. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.